Hello, everybody. I am not driving in the car right now. I tell you, these filters they've got on these apps are wild now. I mean, it looks exactly like I'm driving on the road right now, but that would be crazy to do. I would never do that. Anyway, today I wanted to talk to you today about why do you tell a story set in the past? And then I'm going to get to the point of why do we tell a story set in the future? So this idea came to me, gosh, some years ago now. I was reading a book called Story. I've mentioned it before by the one and only Robert McKee. And McKee makes the point that when you are writing a movie, you need to justify to a producer and a director and the money people that look, if you're going to set a movie in the past, it adds tons and tons and tons of money to the bottom line. It makes production costs much more expensive because of the settings. And if you're driving down a street, you need cars that are specific to the era. You can't have a 1985 Camry in a movie set in, I don't know, 1978. These are the kind of considerations that you need to make. So then you have to ask yourself the question as a storyteller, why are you setting the story in the past? And the short answer is, and I'm going to break this down a little bit, but using a couple of examples. But the short answer is you set a movie in the past because you need to say something true that you, for whatever reason, can't say now. In other words, it's kind of too hot. The truth that you want to talk about is too much because it's too raw, it's too soon, as you might say, and therefore you need to make sure that you kind of almost obscure it a little bit. Now, that's a little bit of a cynical take, and I'm not entirely sure that that tells the whole story. But what I do think it says, the story that I do think it says, is that for whatever reason, setting a story in the current time is not possible, either because your audience doesn't want to see the truth, perhaps, or maybe the audience is unable to tell the truth, and so therefore you set a story in the past so as to tell a truth that you can't now. So the other day I watched a great movie um, called The Holdovers, and I believe it's set in Christmas of 70 into the new year of 71, but I may have that off by a year. But at any rate, early 70s, and it is told at a boarding school, and it is fantastic. It features Paul Giamatti as a classical languages and history professor at a very prestigious they were all boys schools back in the day, all boys boarding school called Barton. And the premise is that a few, unlucky few of the boys, for whatever reason, are unable to go home for the holidays. And so one teacher must stay back in order to watch the precious kiddos while everybody else goes off to, Tahiti and Fiji and or home or, all those grand places while a few are not unable to go. And as you know, I am a boarding school teacher, and this is not a problem that we currently have. But I do remember when I first applied for the job at the boarding school, I did not come from a world, the South, that had any kind of, just didn't know what to do with the idea of a boarding school. Because as a kid, if you went to boarding school, either you were in trouble, so you went to some sort of, like, I don't know, reform school, or your parents didn't like you. And so when I interviewed for the job here, sort of one of my concerns was exactly that. I'd be dealing with a bunch of kids whose parents didn't want them. I can say unequivocally that that is not the case. As a matter of fact, it is not the case at all. So, at any rate, we go about our business and we do our thing, and the idea that our current parents do not want their kids is laughable. If anything, I would love to counsel um, all of my parents to, like, back off a little bit. Be a little bit less helicoptery, be a little bit less snowplowy of a parent, and kind of like let your children, your boys and girls, make some mistakes. It's going to be okay. By the way, isn't this filter amazing? I mean, it looks exactly like I'm driving, but good thing I'm not driving. So, anyway, The Holdovers is, a coming of age story, and it really is a story about a young man and an older man, and both are arrested for reasons that are somewhat beyond their control. There's a beautiful moment in which Giamatti says, in his sort of caustic fashion, I find this world to be perplexing and a bitter place, and it's confusing. And he really kind of lays it out there. And what you learn is that his cynicism is, of course, as cynicism tends to be, a kind of protective measure. But it is really about a world that no longer makes sense. And, for those of us who talk often about the so-called meaning crisis, setting a movie in the current time and space blocks you from seeing certain true things. But all of a sudden, you set the movie in, the past, and you can see how dashed dreams dry up and cause cynicism and cause a kind of shrinking of the human person. And so the main teacher is cynical. He is all those things. And he's inflicting his pain, his cynicism on his kids, his students, and all the students hate him. He is not the sort of the love, the the beloved curmudgeon. Not at all. He's in fact, he's actually hated, and it turns out for good reason. So another example of so the idea you set a movie in the the past because for whatever reason to set it in the current time and space you get too obscured maybe with references and a different kind of authenticity. So I'm sitting there watching the movie and watching it by myself because the kids are peeled off doing their own thing and my wife's out of town, you know and I'm cracking up because I'm a teacher. And but it's also, you see these kids, these raw kids, they're what they're 16, 17 years old in 1970, and you see, this world, this alienating world, and I'm just not so sure we could see that same world in our current, time and place. There's something, if it was set in 2025, it would somehow, we couldn't see it. So then I was thinking of, another movie that is going to be set in the past, and it's coming out, and everybody's kind of freaking out about it, including me because I'm a little nervous. But that is Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, and you know, in part, I'm sure they're doing a version of the Odyssey because there are no good ones out there. That's one thing. But I also think in part you want to tell a story set in this case the very distant past because there's something about maybe Odysseus's need to accomplish his homecoming that will be salient for a contemporary audience. And so maybe that does double duty. Number one, you're paying homage to an old story that we've been telling forever. And also that maybe there's something about Odysseus's journey, Odysseus's homecoming, Odysseus's problems that speak to our problems in our current day. And as someone who teaches the book on the regular. In fact, I've taught it for the past 5 years. This is the first year I haven't taught it in a couple of years because I flexed out of this class and teaching a different class now. But the Odyssey is shockingly contemporary in terms of its concerns, though it's set obviously in an ancient Stone Age register. And so that story then is one that maintains its relevance, but you have to kind of translate it, and I think that's the difficult part. So everybody, anyway, people are like, oh, such and such is being, cast in this role, and Matt Damon is cast in the role of Odysseus, which I think is probably a pretty good choice. And then the other day they came out with a poster, and it's spelled in a Greek alphabet, but it's the wrong letters because nobody reads ancient Greek except for people who read ancient Greek, but a contemporary audience. So it's funny. It's a misspelling, but anyway. But one of the funny things you see on Twitter about this, it cracks me up, or X. Sorry, I'm so boomer coded. One of the things you see on X is people freaking out about this. And I definitely have a tendency to freak out about these kind of things. But the most hilarious versions of this is like, well, why is he wearing a Roman helmet, and why is his armor not, the kind of armor that would have been used, back in the day, as if sort of verisimilitude was the marker of authenticity. And this is why, sometimes you have to tell a kind of nerdy, semi-autistic historian to be like, you know what, tap the brakes, back away. It's going to be okay. They're going to tell the story, and they're going to use whatever they have at their disposal, not to sort of tell an historically accurate story, which is also funny because, it's the Odyssey. It's I think there's real truth in the middle of all that, but there's layers and layers and layers of mythology, let's just say. And I don't mean that dismissive as a fan of mythology. Remember, mythology does not equal lie. But at any rate, I do that thing all the time with the any rate. I'm going to try to stop that, audience. I really am. By the way, hit like and subscribe, all that nice stuff. And by the way, again, not driving right now. These filters are amazing, let me tell you. And I was not driving to Boston again today to drop somebody off at Logan. Good thing, because that would be bad. So, so anyway, people are freaking out about the Odyssey, and there's nothing worse than this kind of, I don't know, what is this? Like, you see this in scripture studies too. Like, well, actually, that didn't actually happen. We know from this word usage that it's actually a later addition, and it really misses the point. You set a story like you tell a story like the Odyssey because you need to tell the audience something true about right now in 2025. You're trying to tell them some sort of contemporary truth that you can't tell in a better way than telling an old story. So then, does this work in the opposite direction? I do think it's sort of you can do this. So if you tell a story set in the past because you're trying to tell a hot truth now, what about if you try to tell a story in the future? One of my all-time favorite movies and books, but they're two totally different things, it's a movie called Children of Men, and it is really a fine film. I mean, just a really fantastic film, but it's really different from the novel. But my sense of both the novel and the film is that P.D. James is trying to tell a story about some currents she sees in the now that we can't see in the now because they're too close to us. But by telling a story about infertility and the potential costs of scaled out civilizational infertility, can we see some things that are true? And in part, it doesn't matter. Like, she never tells us what is the reason that no more babies are being born. We just don't know. We don't know if it is environmental. We don't know if it was some sort of conspiracy. But in the end, it doesn't really matter. What she does is she speed runs the idea into the future of what would happen if we stopped replicating ourselves. What would happen if we stopped procreating? And it's such a great idea, especially now. I'm sure all of the pro-natalist crowd, kind of an odd bunch, I must say. Even though I love babies and I'm pro-babies and I want everybody to get married and have babies, the pro-natalist crowd is very strange. They're very, I don't know, I feel like a lot of them are like into this sort of tech utopia strain of things. So anyway, not exactly my cup of tea, but they would probably love this P.D. James book, and they believe that they can solve the infertility crisis by jamming us all with a bunch of technology. I have my doubts about this in real ways, but I won't get political on this particular conversation because remember, you set a story in the future because there's something about the current time and space that it's too hot to tell this truth. But if you tell the story in, not 2025, but 2125, or you set the story in 1925 instead of 2025, well, all of a sudden, it's not so close to you. People don't feel like their feelings are going to get hurt. And you can start to tell some truthful implications. You can draw out some truthful implications that you would otherwise not be able to do. And so then you can always ask yourself the question, what is this director or storyteller or poet, what are they trying to say about now? And as a teacher and lover of old books, that's the trick, right? That's what I'm trying to do. I don't have any necessary historical attachment to, I don't know, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight or Shakespeare's Macbeth or Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, or a novel set in pre-revolutionary Russia. Like, I don't have any particular historical interest in that, only insofar as those kinds of stories can illuminate something either true about our current time and place, or they tell us something true about human nature. Because remember, we watch stories so that we can understand ourselves. We tell stories so that we can attempt to say something true about ourselves. And we're such a curious species insofar as we can tell stories about ourselves. Instead of having two guys duke it out and kill one another, we can just tell a story. Such a cool idea. I love this idea. Anyway, so you set a movie into the future. Now, one of my talk about a story that is really about now, but is set in the distant future, is a satire like Idiocracy. It is hard to watch a show like Idiocracy right now and not think, oh my gosh, those two guys are absolute prophets. How did they know? Right? Well, a keen observer takes things that are almost in their, the little sparks, their infancy stage, like they're barely showing up, but the keen observer can see a small little shimmer and see a potential earthquake, which is in a way a kind of exercise in pattern recognition, right? So if you can look at the past to say something true about the present, then you can look into a predicted future or a what if scenario in the future, and you can render something that is true about our time and space. So, yeah, I guess my point is that you can be instructed by stories, and you should be instructed by stories. And stories that are set in the now are amazing, but stories that are set in the past always tell a little something about what's going on now. They hide something ever so slightly, or what I like to say is they distort something so that you can see it clearly. For instance, like my glasses, right? If I gave these glasses to another person who was not nearsighted and did not have an astigmatism, it would make you blind, right? It would distort things out of focus and make you blind. But for me, I need the distortion so as to right my the wrong of my own vision, my own seeing. And so stories distort and concentrate, magnify and shrink, provide a kind of clarity that you would otherwise not have. And oftentimes, the hardest thing to see is the present. It's certainly the hardest thing to live in. Gosh, don't we all know that? I can look at the past with a certain amount of clarity. I can even predict the future with a certain amount of sensical clarity. But the present, my goodness, who the heck knows what's going on? But if you don't have a repertoire of stories set either in the fictional past, the fictional future, you don't have a reservoir of stories, you have no chance of understanding what's going on now. You just have none. Stories are this sort of distortion machine, and I don't mean distortion in a bad way. Think about, like an electric guitar. The distortion is not a bug, it's a feature. Storytelling is not a bug, it's a feature. Storytelling opens up for us a clarity of vision for what we need to see right now. It's interesting too, it's why I think activist art is not really art, because activist art begins with the answers first. It's not exploratory, it's explanatory only, or it's an attempt to be explanatory. And oddly enough, when art is not exploratory, when art is merely explanatory, it kind of doesn't work. That's why propaganda is so terrible, and propaganda just goes away. Now, good propaganda that's buried deep within a narrative, that can go, that can be pretty darn potent. So anyway, all right, guys, I think that's enough for today. I'm going to call that a wrap. Cheers, and I'm out of here.